Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlelady is recognized for as much time as she may consume.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank my good friend, the lovely lady from Nevada, Ms. Berkeley, for those kind words. And we've got a good, strong partnership when it comes to promoting the ideals of freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. And in that category, Israel will always stand out. And I'm proud to obviously support this resolution, which I authored and sponsored, House Resolution 1391, which congratulates Israel on being approved for membership in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The OECD brings together governments committed to democracy and a market economy in advancing freedom and advancing prosperity. The recent unanimous support of OECD member states for Israel's membership is a well-deserved seal of approval for Israel, one that can reinforce its progress and will benefit both Israel and the members of the OECD. Mr. Speaker, the history of Israel's pursuit of membership in the OECD speaks volumes about the nature of Israel, also lamentably of the Palestinian leadership, and of the U.S. engagement in international organizations. Israel, the free, democratic country that it is, pursued OECD membership not with a sense of entitlement, but with patience and eagerness to demonstrate its eligibility and its competence, and improving herself in the process. Israel first sent an observer delegation to the OECD in 1994. In the 16 years since that time, Israel has carried out far-reaching economic reforms with respect to taxes, labor, competition, capital markets, pension funds, energy, communications, transport, housing. Mr. Speaker, the list goes on. And it has grown into a now booming private sector and streamlined its overgrown public sector. Its tax burden is much lower than that of most OECD member states. Israel is now a world leader in science, technology, entrepreneurship, home to the most high technology startup companies, scientific publications, and research and development spending per capita. And it has been the most active non-member country in the OECD, becoming a member or an observer in dozens of working bodies, a party to numerous OECD declarations, and coming into compliance with multiple OECD standards. Israel also continues to uphold the democratic values of its founding, with a vibrant political system, a robust and autonomous judiciary, and a commitment to human rights. In short, Israel's democracy, its prosperity, and her freedom are a model for many nations and many people. Israel has clearly made its case for OECD membership. The Palestinian leadership, in contrast, has spent the last 16 years demonstrating time after time that it never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity. It has rejected every offer of peace from Israel. It has refused to recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. It has failed to crack down on violent extremism and anti-Israel incitement. Indeed, it has even tolerated and encouraged such behavior. It has supported boycotts of Israeli goods, and the Palestinian Authority's Prime Minister, whom some consider a moderate, even participated in a mass burning of such goods. And it has consistently tried to use international organizations, from the UN General Assembly to the Human Rights Council with its infamous Goldstone report, to the International Criminal Court, to demonize and delegitimize Israel. The Palestinian Authority tried hard to block Israel's candidacy for membership in the OECD, with the same Palestinian Authority Prime Minister personally lobbying foreign governments to oppose Israel's membership. Is this a partner for peace, Mr. Speaker? But it gets worse. A former PA foreign minister and senior associate of Abu Mazen, announced just last week that the PA was intensifying its diplomatic and economic offensive against Israel. He said the PA needed, and I quote, to increase our efforts in the international arena to isolate and punish Israel, prevent it from deepening its relations with the European Union, and attempt to expel it from the United Nations. He continues, we must pursue Israel in all international bodies and institutions, end quote. And Palestinian leaders keep threatening violence to extract concessions. Instead of focusing on building a better future for its people, the Palestinian leaders are focusing on tearing down that future for Israel and her citizens. This Congress should not reward such behavior by providing yet another $400 million bailout to the West Bank and Gaza, including another $150 million in cash directly to the PA. Finally, Israel's candidacy for OECD membership teaches us a lesson about when and how the U.S. should participate in international forums and when and how it should not. The OECD is what the UN was intended to be, a group of free, democratic countries cooperating to advance their values and shared interest. It has rigorous membership standards, and new members must be approved by all existing members. Its Secretary General has demonstrated commitment to ensuring that Israel's candidacy and other issues are determined on the merits and are not politicized. That's why the U.S. should and does participate in the OECD, including by actively supporting Israel's candidacy for membership. In contrast, the UN's misnamed Human Rights Council has no meaningful standards for membership other than the ability to gain the support of a mere majority of the UN General Assembly, which in itself includes scores of countries that are not free democracies. In the most recent so-called elections, using the term loosely, to the Human Rights Council earlier this month, every single candidate, no matter how repressive the government, ran unopposed on previously agreed upon regional slates. That's not democracy. It's what happens in the Castro brothers' Cuba. And so it is no surprise that the Cuban regime is a long-standing member of the rogues gallery that is the Human Rights Council, as are China, Saudi Arabia, and now Gaddafi's Libyan regime. None of these countries ever are condemned by the Human Rights Council for their rampant human rights violations, nor is Iran, nor is Syria, but the Council has devoted 80% of its resolutions and about half of its special sessions to bashing the democratic Jewish state of Israel. And it has passed numerous other anti-freedom measures. The administration's decision to join the Council and the last year of the U.S. membership on that Council have not changed these grim facts, lamentably. When the deck is stacked, when the fix is in against freedom and against democracy, the answer should be not to participate and instead vote no. The answer is for the U.S. and other responsible nations to walk out and demand better. Today, however, in this legitimate and distinguished House, I will proudly vote yes on this resolution. I encourage all of my colleagues to do the same. I thank my good friend and colleague from New York, Mr. Crowley, for co-sponsoring this resolution with me. I thank our wonderful chairman, Chairman Berman, for agreeing to move it so promptly for floor consideration. And I again thank my good friend from Nevada, Ms. Berkeley, for always standing on the side of Israel, always standing on the side of freedom and democracy. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of our time.
The gentlelady from Florida reserves the balance of her time. The gentlelady from Nevada.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I might consume.
The gentlelady is recognized for as much time